is about bringing together people who push that frontier. And what better topic than this one? And I would just share a couple of thoughts before you start. The first one is, I was thinking, what is in a name? Because you all might not realize we've had all these big debates among us profs at the STG. Is STG a name everybody understands? And with our session today, I'm kind of thinking, you know, transnational governance, does that encompass what we're going to talk today? So Claudio, I apologize for making this impromptu announcement, but I think our school should rename itself Trans-Space Governance or Trans Spaces. Good, I'm glad that, see, the beauty of Claudio and I is we always agree. He knows how committed I am to the program, and I think he's doing an absolutely brilliant job, and he and I will lobby for this name change. But actually, this is a semi-serious point, you know, because which points to the fact that in all of our paradigms that we teach, and I teach international relations, about what's the space that is encompassed by our governance? What's the territorial phase, the object of governance, but also who is entitled to govern that space? Instead, we could also say that this topic is anchored in old thinking, because you're going to talk a lot about transnational, transgovernmental bargains. So here's a completely other world, the next frontier of international cooperation. But we start with good old government. The nice thing is actually we don't stop with good old governance. And the array of speakers that Etim is going to introduce to us, of course, testify to the fact that we have governments. And of course, that is important. Their states are still the main actors in the international system, but we also have many different types of actors. And I think that space offers us really a paradox, or at least a tension, for thinking about this frontier of cooperation. And it's been a while, of course, that we've had debates about the governance of space, both at the global level and increasingly also between Europe and specific continents, and Europe and Africa is critical in this vein, because we are talking about a system of governance beyond geographical boundaries, but through alliances that are themselves geographical. And I, for one, believe that there is a key and critical alliance to be made between Europe and Africa in this space. And the paradox, I would suggest, is that on one hand, everyone agrees that, well, this is a space where is the best possible area of cooperation. And, you know, you just have to go with Bruce Willis, you know, and every other, you know, so many Hollywood movies where humanity unites, you know, to do something in space. But at the same time, we also know that indeed, because it's virgin in many ways, although not entirely, states and other non-state actors are envisaging a fierce competition in outer space, maybe fiercer than anything we've known in the colonial era of yesteryear, and not just yesteryear, on our good old Earth. So let me just simply, in passing the baton to Etim, say that I trust all of you to deal with this paradox in an extremely fruitful way and much beyond. And I can't wait to hear everything you have to say. And on this, Etim, thank you so much on behalf of STG for putting this panel together. And I wish you the best of conversation for the rest of the day, and I'll be listening in. Thank you.
Thank you, Calypso. Once again, I welcome everybody to this event. By way of introduction, which I ought to have done at the beginning, my name is Etim Offiong. My affiliation before now was the African Regional Center for Space Science and Technology Education in English. It's one of the regional centers that was established by the UN to develop indigenous capacity building in developing countries. And I'm happy to inform you that the brain behind that idea is also part of this event, even though he's going to come up at the second panel, and that's in the person of Adigun Abiodun, Thank you very much for joining the event. But presently, I'm a fellow at the European University Institute, specifically the School of Transnational Governance, which has been introduced to us by Professor Calypso. The EUI has a lot of affiliation with space, and a couple of projects, researches have been done with respect to space. This event is focusing on the EU-Africa partnership, but there are other aspects of space activities that go on in the EUI. And just before we go into the panel discussion proper, I want to invite Mr. Gerardo Bonini to talk to us about, just briefly, a few thoughts about EUI and its connection with space, especially with respect to the European Space Agency and European Commission. Mr. Bonini, please, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Etim, and thank you for everybody to have made possible this intervention of mine. I would like to introduce what are the resources for a study about Europe, Africa, space policy and relationships during the year. The historical archives of the European Union now have nearly 200 archival holdings. On the specific subject of space policy, the collections of European Space Agency, ESA, European Science Foundation, ESF, and the Western European Union, WEU, are worth nothing but narrowing the focus on relations between Europe and Africa. The ESA archival holdings present very useful resources for research. The access of the archives database and the related descriptions of the folders is possible by accessing the homepage of the European University Institute, then refining the search by selecting and clicking the Historical Archives option. There are two fundamental ways to access the description of the folders and thereby the knowledge of what can be useful for research: through holdings button and through keywords boxes. In the case of space policy relation between ESA and Africa, the best approach is through keyword research. The most helpful keywords and strings for the research in question, and I simulated the research, are of course Africa, space policy, and developing countries. Using the further refining selection tools on the right side, the user can focus the object. ESA has set the time interval between the creation of the document and its possible communication to the researcher and the citizen at 15 years. So theoretically, we are in 2021, we can access to the files up to 2006. However, ESA decided to close some dossier, some files, but a minimal percentage, at the end of the 30 years as institutional interval for reasons of confidentiality. On the subject of Africa, 52 files have been identified in ESA archival holdings, all of which can be consulted except one closer to 2027 by decision of the ESA itself. They are documents relating to the official series produced by the various administrative offices of ESA. However, almost all of them belong to the Committee for International Relations. The official series folders are a notable source for research. They are the product of an initiative of the competent office, in this case, International Relations Committee Office, however, reviewed and by almost all the main ESA offices, including the two decision-making by the Council and the Director's Cabinet. For instance, an example, ESA 6895 folder, on the other hand, reports, correspondence, and notes, therefore a type different from that of official documents, which are called usually blue papers. In some, there are 50 blue papers, official issues, and one file composed by correspondence, interoffice memorandum, and other types of papers. Those folders cover the time span between 1975 and 2006, but above all, the period between 1975 and 1996. From the most recent period, there are documents concerning the Tiger project, launched by ISA in 2002 to support the management in Africa of the resources deriving from water. In general, the main topics are telecommunications, meteorological satellites, receivers stations, traineeships. The countries that are most mentioned in the folders are South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, but also Kenya and other countries, Burkina Faso, and so on. Although few other interesting documents can be identified by typing in the search boxes some African organizations, such as collapsed African Remote Sensing Council Union, ARCU, the Pan-African Telecommunications Union, PATU, presently the ATU in South Africa, Pan-African Documentation and Information Service, PADIS, headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Regional African Satellite Communication Organization, RESCOM, headquartered in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. There are also files relating to relations with the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO. Finally, there are several files which are interesting for research by typing the term developing countries in the appropriate spaces. So those are 52 files related to Africa keywords. There are other files of interest for the searchers. For those folders, the searcher must pay attention that the ESA strategy, linked since the mid-90s to extensive international collaborations, concern the developing countries of several continents. Therefore, it's necessary to look for the part of those documents which specifically concern Africa from the general ones. Useful information can be obtained from those documents. I have the honor to mention this short paragraph extracted from the folder Relations with the Developing Countries, ISA 19959, should be interesting to her part of these documents, is in the ESA official issues. Developing countries must be made aware of the available possibilities offered by space technology through projects, symposia, training courses, and bilateral discussions. In the medium and the long term, it should be possible to envisage that satellites tailored to a developing country's or region's needs could be built by consortia drawn from developing countries and Europe, thereby combining European high technology expertise and the rising industrial capacity in the developing countries, whose labor costs are less than in Europe. Standard components for European satellites could eventually be produced in developing countries in exchange for those countries acquiring more sophisticated components from Europe for their satellites. After underlying the importance of the commitment of the European institutions, in particular the commissions, of course, the passage, this excerpt concludes, last but not least, should the effort vis-à-vis the developing countries also be seen in the conjunction of global competitiveness of European projects on the future world market. This is an excerpt of this file. With my collaborator, Andrea Casar, we are dealing with the ESA folders presently kept in Villa El Pojol. That is an intermediate stage in the archival workflow, dedicated to the international relations. Those folders are still unworked and to be added to the present collections, which are stored in Villa Salviati and there communicable to the users in the related reading rooms. We are currently analyzing those dedicated to China. By the end of the year 2021, we will try to deal with the 15 containers concerning African countries. And we are confident to have inserted the description in the database. So in sum, we have 52 folders from the official issues, other files concerning developing countries, and inside those files, Africa relationships, and 15 folders, provisional folders to be dealt with. And we are confident to finish this work by the end of the year. Those last files cover the period 1975-1996 and are mainly composed by correspondence, interoffice memoranda, short reports. To be remarked that by overviewing the titles of the provisional folders, the main topics refer to remote sensing installations, Earth observation, traineeships, and telecommunications. Finally, there are still some files relating to FAO. In sum, we are still at the level of international relations and strategic collaboration between ESA and its partners, international partners.
Mr. Bonini.
In conclusion, and I thank you very much, everybody, for the attention, the historical archives of the European Union can really make available to researchers of the Europe-Africa space relations a good number of folders that can contribute to the drafting of articles and papers of notable standard. Thank you to everybody for the attention. Thank you, Etim, for this great occasion for me to present the resources of historical archives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonini. So in summary, we have access to all archives, all the correspondences, all the materials of ESA right from its establishment in 1975, and then it's open for public access. Thank you, Mr. Bonini, and then we just go straight into the discussion proper. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. So we have, sorry, maybe I should just give it, for those who did not join us from the beginning, let me just give you the structure of the event today. We're going to have two panels. The first panel, we have 4 discussants. The second panel, we have 5 discussants. So for the first panel, we have Ms. Jolanda Eijndthoven. For the second panel, Ms. Jolanda Eijndthoven, Dr. Munsami, Dr. Tidiane Ouattara, and Professor Nicolas Peter. So I'll just introduce them quickly. Jolanda Eijndthoven joined the European Commission in 2002 after working with the Dutch Ministry of Finance, advising on EU law in the area of taxation. Within the European Commission, she has worked in different taxation domains, coordinating the enforcement of European law, proposed a legislative initiative to improve the single market for services, dealt with defense procurement, legal and institutional aspects of Egnos and Galileo, as well as space policy. Since September, she is head of the unit responsible for international affairs and communication in the Directorate General for Defense, Industry and Space. That's the Directorate General that is responsible for space matters in the EU. Ms. Eijndthoven holds a master's degree in energy and environmental law from the Catholic University of Leuven, Institute of Environmental and Energy Law, and a master's degree in tax law from the University of Leiden. University of Leiden is very well known for their program in space law as well. And then after Jolanda, we have Dr. Tidiane Ouattara, who is currently the space expert and GMES and Africa project coordinator at the African Union Commission. For those of us who are not aware of what GMES and Africa is about, we will hopefully before the end of the event, we'll get to know what it's about. During his leadership, the African space policy and strategy were adopted by the African heads of state and government. The strategy focuses on 4 main domains: Earth observation, satellite communication, navigation and positioning, and as well as astronomy and space sciences. Also, under his leadership, the African Space Agency has been established to coordinate and harmonize space activities in Africa, as well as implement continental programs. He has also led various bilateral arrangements between the Commission and international partners in space affairs. He has also successfully led the first phase of GMES and Africa program, which ended this year. He will tell us more about that, and the second phase, which is supposed to start next year. Dr. Tidiane also serves on the board of Digital Earth Africa, which is another initiative on Earth observation. And their main activity is to create regional data cubes for easier navigation through archive data and development of prediction models. Dr. Tidiane has a PhD and a master's degree in remote sensing and geographic information systems from Sherbrooke University in Canada, respectively in 2001 and 1996. He also has a master's degree in physical geography from Université de Cocody in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And then after Tidiane, we have Dr. Munsami, who holds a PhD in physics, a master's in business leadership, a space studies program diploma from the International Space University in Strasbourg, and a certificate in international airspace and telecommunication law. He worked in South Africa Secretariat for the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, managed implementation of a suite of bilateral and multilateral science and technology agreements, involved in the development of South Africa's national space strategy and national space policy. He also oversaw the establishment of the South African National Space Agency. On winning the hosting of the Square Kilometer Array in 2012, the Square Kilometer Array is the biggest radio astronomy project in the world right now. He became the chief specialist for astronomy and African space science. He chaired the African Union Space Working Group, which developed the African space policy and strategy. Since 2007, he was appointed as the CEO of the South African National Space Agency. He's also a member of the South African Council on Space Affairs. He sits on several boards, including the IAF, that's the International Astronautical Federation, as well as the Space Generation Advisory Council. And then last but not the least is Professor Nicolas Peter, who is presently a professor of practice in space policy and international affairs at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. He was seconded there by the European Space Agency. He's head of the newly created Space Policy and Entrepreneurship Lab at ISU, which is dedicated to research in space policy and space economy, including what we call new space. Prior to his appointment at ISU, he was the head of international affairs at the German Aerospace Center, which is the German Space Agency. He has worked at the European Commission, specifically at the Space Policy and Research Unit, on various topics, such as planning for Horizon 2020, coordinating space policy studies, and supporting the 2016 European Commission Space Strategy Development. He has also worked at ESA in the Director General's Cabinet and Strategy Department, including on the development of the Agenda 2015. Prior to joining ESA, he was a research fellow at the European Space Policy Institute, a Lockheed Martin fellow at the George Washington University Space Policy Institute, and a research fellow at the X Prize Foundation. He has written several papers and authored several books. He's also a member of the board of the Women in Aerospace Europe, as well as the Space Generation Advisory Council. So we have a very huge lineup of speakers who are very conversant and involved in space activities, both in the EU and in the AU, as well as the cooperation between the two of them. Just before they come up, I would just want to set the stage just for participants to understand the EU-AU partnership and the space component of the EU-AU's partnership. So I'll just quickly set that stage by, let me just share my slide. So reflections on EU-Africa space relations. How do I move my slide? Okay, the first Africa-Europe summit was held in Cairo, Egypt, and that was the first official meeting, so to say, between the two continents, Europe and Africa. And that meeting was held under the auspices of the OAU, the Organization for African Unity, and the European Union. The meeting came out with what we call the Cairo Declaration, which among other things recognized the ties between Africa and Europe. It called for a stronger cooperation between Africa and Europe and called for cooperation in international fora. The next summit was held in 2007 in Lisbon, Portugal, but the interval of time between 2000 and 2007, a lot of things happened both at the EU and at the AU. For example, OAU, which was that's Organization for African Unity, was transformed into AU, that's African Union, in 2002. And with that transformation, the government also introduced what was called NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa Self-Development. Even though right now there's another reformation going on in the AU, and NEPAD has now been changed to AUDA, that's the African Union Development Agency. In Europe also, the EU membership also enlarged to about 27 member states in 2007. Of course, with all these political changes, you also expect changes in the partnership and in their area of focus. Now that's politically speaking. Within the space domain also, this same period, we had the first gathering of African space professionals, which is called the ASLC, African Space Leadership Congress. Most of the participants, of the founders and the brain behind that meeting are also part of this panel. The first meeting was held in 2005. I'm just going through all this so that you see how space, the position of space in Africa, began to get more and more attention across the continent. Also in 2007, the EU introduced for the first time, the European space policy. Now, at the end of that summit, At the end of the summit, what's called JAHES, the Joint Africa-Europe Strategy, was adopted. Why it's called joint is because just before that summit, Europe had introduced a strategy for Africa. That was in 2005. But the African heads of state felt they wanted to be part of the development process. So that's why it's called a joint summit. JAHES, which is the kind of the framework for the partnership between Europe and Africa, outlines the shared vision, the principles, the objectives, the mutual priorities and governance framework for the partnership. It also provides political guidance for the two countries as they interact. Shortly after, during that same period, the first action plan was adopted, and what you have on the screen there is the priority areas where the two continents decided to focus on. And you will see the last bullet point, 8, shows that space was going to be part of the areas of interest. And of course, with this new development, it was also necessary to have a stronger representation both at the EU and at the AU. So the European delegation to the AU was established in 2008. And of course, the AU also upgraded what was its Brussels office to a permanent mission. One of the very important things about this summit is that it also initiated the beginning of the GMES and Africa initiative, which Tidiane is going to talk to us about. The third Africa-AU summit was held in Libya, and that was in December 2010. The second action plan was adopted, and that action plan maintained the 8 priority areas which were in the first plan. One of the important things about this action plan is that it contained a more detailed process for the GMES and Africa initiative. That included establishing a secretariat to drive the initiative, and that secretariat is currently headed by Tidiane, as I mentioned earlier. It also contained a process to identify user communities and requirements between, especially for the African participants. During that process also, there was a mapping of all the organizations that will be contributing to the projects and activities of the GMES and Africa initiative. That mapping was done by the European Space Policy Institute. Another part of the action plan, which is of importance, is the initiative to extend Egnos. Egnos is a space-based augmentation system which improves your navigation and positioning. So the plan was to extend that service to Africa. Again, there was a plan to support AFREF. AFREF means Africa Reference Frame, which is supposed to have a system to have a single level datum line, as we call it, so that measurements, Earth measurements could be made from the same reference point across Africa. The action plan also recommended that there should be a feasibility study for the establishment of an African Space Agency. That initiative was carried out by Vega Telespazio, and but eventually a new process was initiated, which I will also talk about very soon. That summit also established a high-level dialogue on science and technology. So we see again between these periods, between 2011, 2013, a lot of developments in Europe, a lot of developments in Africa. For example, in Africa, the very first IAC, the International Astronautical Congress, was held in 2011 in South Africa. That was the first time that meeting, which is the global gathering of all space professionals across the world. The first time it held was in 1950, and it did not happen. It was not held in Africa until 2011. That also raised the profile of space in Africa. When I was reading Val's bio, I mentioned the SKA. South Africa led 8 other countries in Africa to bid for the SKA, and South Africa won, and that happened in 2012. That same year, the African Union established the African Union Space Working Group, which developed the African Space Policy and Strategy. That working group was chaired by Munsami, who is on this first panel, and Dr. Adigun Abiodun was also in that working group and is going to come up in the second panel. The fourth summit was held in 2014, and this particular summit, a roadmap was developed, and what you see there are the areas of concentration for the roadmap. One of the interesting things about this summit was the establishment, the AU space tracker was actually established in 2011, but it was just the commissions, the African Union Commission and the European Commission, that were interacting at that moment. But during this summit, the space tracker was elevated, and it began to offer, let me say, policy advice also to the commissions, to the 2 continents, to Europe and Africa. Very important to note, which Kai Uwe will also talk about in the second panel, was the International Code of Conduct for Outer Space, which was initiated by the EU. And at this summit, it was agreed that Africa should give support towards this code of conduct, even though this code of conduct has been replaced by something which has been more generally accepted by the UN, as the long-term sustainability of outer space. Right, so also between 2014 and 2017, a lot of events in Africa and in Europe. The African Space Policy and Strategy was adopted by African heads of state in 2016. And the African Space Agency was officially established in 2018. And Egypt was adopted as the host of the agency. I recall that the whole partnership between Europe and Africa actually started from Egypt. So it was just like we are going back to where we started from. The 5th summit, the 5th summit, I think I've missed one slide. Yeah, the 5th summit, that was in 2017. This marked the 10th year anniversary of the AU-EU partnership. And at this summit, we had a declaration. So basically what was happening was that over the years, there's been a streamlining of the goals, of the ambitions, of the priorities, and of the action plan. So we don't need to be going over the same thing over and over again. So at the last summit, we just had this declaration which outlined the 4 strategic areas of cooperation between EU and the AU. Now that was 2017, now this is 2021, and where are we between then and now? GSA, which is the European GNSS agency, has been changed to EUSPA. Following the AU reform, the department that used to coordinate space in the AU, which was called the Human Resource Science, Department of Human Resources, Science and Technology, has been rebranded as the Department of Education, Science and Technology and Innovation. And that department now has 2 divisions. One of those divisions is Science, Technology and Space. So now space has a lot more visibility within the AU. And also, just like I mentioned, 2 flagship programs that started before, that's the GMES in Africa, as well as the Egnos in Africa. A new flagship program has started, CLIMSA, which is Climate Services and Related Applications Program, that was launched earlier this year. Oops, sorry. So the next summit is tentatively fixed for 17th to 18th of February, which is early next year. And the question is, what do we expect from this summit? What is the future of EU-AU space cooperation in the light of present challenges like COVID-19 and climate change? Those are some of the things we just want to discuss during this panel, and hopefully we'll be able to respond to these and other issues that may come up as we go on. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and give the floor to Jolanda for our opening remarks.
Thank you, Etim, and I think someone is going to share indeed some slides from my side. I will keep it short, and thank you very much for the invitation. Of course, as from the European Commission, I hope you understand that for us, indeed, space cooperation between both EU and Africa are very important. So next slide. I wanted to focus very much on the very practical cooperation we have, and actually show that there is already a lot going on, also in light, of course, of what Etim already explained as what came out of the various summits between the EU and Africa. So I will focus briefly on these points, the main tools. So Copernicus, which is our Earth observation program. Then indeed on SBAS, the satellite-based augmentation system in Africa, where we have indeed two elements which are important from our side, which is the cooperation with ASECNA and indeed the Egnos program. And then we have the joint program office in Dakar. And last but not least, I will also say something on Galileo, our global navigation system. Next slide, please. Now on Earth observation, Copernicus has become very much the reference and leading global program in terms of Earth observation. And in that respect, it's important to mention that Copernicus is presenting free and open data exchange of satellite and in situ essential data and of service products between Europe and Africa. Now, Copernicus is delivering data and services which set global standards by offering the most accurate climate and environmental data. And now, of course, very actual with the COP26 ongoing, it also supports to tackle the most pressing challenges of today. Think about the fighting of climate change, preserving the environment and its biodiversity, helping to stimulate technological innovation, and providing socio-economic benefits to citizens. And in that respect, it is from our side, of course, very important that there is a very clear cooperation between Europe and Africa in this respect, via the GMES and Africa Initiative Program, to which Etim also referred. It is a very successful program building on the long investment of EU partners in Africa. For the moment, there are two services in the initial phase. So the natural and water resources service, and we have also the marine and coastal service in this respect. So very successful. In addition to that, the European Commission, via its DG of Defense Industry and Space, signed a cooperation arrangement with the African Union Commission in 2018 to improve the access to data and products from Copernicus to African institutions. And the implementation of this arrangement is currently going on with around 10 African institutions benefiting, and of course also the support of the European Space Agency in this respect. Now, from our side, especially Earth observation is essential in all the new challenges we have, being it environmental, climate, health, but also achieving the sustainability goals, development goals from the UN. And these, especially Earth observation and the cooperation we have between the European Union and Africa, can actually ensure that we help and that we make use of these instruments. Next slide, please. Now, then we have indeed the satellite-based augmentation system. This is also a cooperation between the EU and ASECNA, so the Agency for the Aerial Navigation System in Africa and Madagascar. And this is done via an agreement to develop SBAS for the region. and based on the Egnos technology. So the technology which we have developed in Europe is actually used also to have a similar type of system, so satellite-based augmentation system in Africa. But in addition to that, Egnos itself, so Egnos we use in Europe, is also covering the Northern Africa. So this is also important. Maybe to say a few words on Egnos as such. Egnos is a system which improves the satellite signal from the systems like GPS. And it actually helps in particular in the area of air navigation to help with safe landings and also landings whereby, for instance, there is no airport in the area. So this could be in particular in rural areas be a very helpful addition to the system you have. And then currently we are in Europe developing a new version of Egnos with double frequency multi-constellation. And this also has the potential to be used over large parts of Africa, which is very beneficial as well to the region. Next slide, please. And then we have the Joint Program Office, which is established in Dakar. This is not something which is done by DG DEFIS, which I represent, but this is done by DG INPA, so for international partnerships of the European Commission. Number 3 of this project has started this September and will run for another 3 years. Now, on the one hand, it has indeed the objective to promote the SBAS in the rest of Africa, beyond the, and I should say, 17 member countries of ASECNA, for aviation, but also other applications, because Egnos could, of course, also be used in, for instance, the agricultural sector and helping with precision farming. And in addition to that, it also promotes the use of Galileo in Africa, and there are many different applications for which Galileo could be used and actually help the various sectors of the economy. And then there is also to consolidate the Joint Program Office, the idea to link it in the future to a possible African space agency. So these are the concrete activities we have between the EU and Africa. And for us, if we look at the conclusion and what we want to do in the future, next slide. Then on the one hand, we very much face the new challenges and make efficient use of existing and future technologies. So this would be from the perspective also of Europe and the relationship and cooperation we have between Europe and Africa, absolutely essential. We also see that for us, the African Union is the privileged partner in Africa, and there are reflections from our side indeed as well on seeing if we could establish at one point a space dialogue with the African Union Commission to further enhance the cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolanda. So from what we've heard from Jolanda, we have 2 major programs between the EU and AU. That's the GMES in Africa, which is focused on Earth observation, and the Egnos in Africa program, which is focused on satellite and navigation. One of the things we hope to find out maybe in the course of the event is whether there are other areas of possible collaboration between EU and AU, maybe in communication, maybe in astronomy, maybe in SSA, space situational awareness, but we can discuss that in the course of the meeting. So having heard from the European Commission, we now go to the African Union Commission, and I give the floor to Dr. Tidiane Ouattara.
Thank you very much, my brother Etim. Good afternoon, all. It is really a pleasure to be with you. and to be part of this really very interesting and high-level panel. I just want to take the opportunity to say hello to one of my mentors, Dr. Adigun, who will be panelist at the second part of this session. Also, my greetings to Dr. Val, and also to my big boss, Dr. Mahama, who will deliver the closing remarks. And to all our European colleagues, I'd like to say hello and thank you for being part of this process. And as one can see, you know, Europe and Africa, it is an ongoing discussion. It is an ongoing collaboration, and we cannot do anything without each other. And this being said, I would like personally to redefine a little bit the title on only one word. Instead of looking at the European Union and Africa, I would say simply we have to look at Europe and Africa, because we are talking about the collaboration between two continents, and it will be interesting to look at the large ecosystem instead of looking at the angle of the European Union, because many other activities on space are happening at the bilateral level. That being said, as introductory point, I would say there are three questions we should be able to address today. And the three questions are translated in three words: the why, the what, and the how. Why are we collaborating with Europe, and why should we continue collaborating together? That is very important. And the second point is, what has been done so far and what remains to be done? And the third one, how do you want to do it together? It is clear there are some cross-cutting files, but also there are some vertical files. I think the discussion today should be around these 3 points. And I'd like to take the opportunity to say that from the African Union perspective, as institution, continental institution, we are very happy with our collaboration with the European Union. And more extensively, Africa and Europe are condemned to collaborate on various matters, including space, because we have a long-standing tradition and collaboration which cover several centuries. And secondly, I think Europe are the closest continent to Africa. What happens in Africa is impacting in Europe and vice versa. Again, it should be an open discussion, and we are ready, willing, and keen to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tidiane, for making your remarks very brief. I've noted the 3 points you want us to really focus on: the why, the what, and the how. And I think that also ties up to when we're looking at the summit that is coming up next year: the why, the what, and the how. And then you've also said we should kind of focus more at the continental level, not just a small block. So having listened to the commissions, the two commissions, let's look at it from a national perspective, if I may put it that way. I'll give the floor to Dr. Val Munsami.
Thank you, Etim, and thanks for convening this gathering. I think it's very informative, especially the high-level delegation you got gathered around. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I want to take maybe a step or two back and maybe start off with the basic premise and then start to build a narrative around that. So first of all, just to say that education is the most powerful weapon that can be used to change the world. Okay, so with all the challenges that Africa is facing, socio-economic, environmental issues, the only way to impact that is to empower and uplift its citizens. Click on. So there's a saying that goes that if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. If you teach them how to fish, you feed them for life. Now there's two fundamental philosophies underpinning that statement. The first one is that we need to move away from a donor-recipient relationship. The second is that, you know, if you empower and uplift, you create a sustainable environment where the citizens themselves are empowered to deal with the challenges at a local level. And I think this is where the partnership between Africa and Europe really gets fueled by an equal yoking on both sides. Next slide. So if you think about where Africa and Europe is, you know, if you look at how we're bridging the space divide. So if I look at it in terms of where Africa is, we've got 55 member states in Africa. So there's emerging nations. So I think in the last few years, there's been about 20 new space agencies that have emerged. And so there's emerging nations. And then there's a few countries that are sort of developing nations, like South Africa. And then there's developed nations. So I can put Europe on the extreme right. So if you look at developing nations like South Africa, it's a part of our foreign policy. We have a responsibility towards uplifting and developing the rest of Africa. But we also have to aspire in terms of what developed nations are kind of doing. And so we have to, even as South Africa, really look at our positioning in terms of how we see ourselves with regards to emerging nations and developed nations. Next click. So when you try to unpack the space divide, so at the core is, so why isn't it fully, taken up across the 55 African countries? Why is there no full support? Well, first of all, you need the political support. The political principles need to buy into a national and regional space program. There's also an issue of financial resourcing, and then technology readiness level, and that comes back to the education and empowerment issues I spoke about. And linked to that is the human capital and having warm bodies on the floor to actually run these programs. And then you need the requisite infrastructure. So these are the kind of challenges we're facing when you're looking at it from an emerging, developing nations perspective. So to fill that gap, you need to underscore the socioeconomic benefits, which then leads into the political support that you're looking for. In terms of financial resourcing, if you have suboptimal resourcing, you need to look at prioritization. When you look at technology readiness level, then you talk about technology transfer. Human capital, knowledge transfer. When you look at infrastructure, can we look at co-development? So I think this is where the partnership can be used and leveraged to fill in the gap. But I think what's core to this conversation is that governance framework. So you've got 55 countries that needs to sort of act and work in concert. Now you have an African space agency that's come through. You need to look at the full implementation cost because space is a capital intensive business. And then you need to look at the culture and the geopolitics. So in Africa, we've got about 4 or 5 different languages and cultures. You know, you've got English, French, Arabic, Portuguese, and so on. So you need to also navigate that culture issues and the geopolitics. Next slide. So one of the things you need to look at both from a national and a maybe regional perspective is what I call the ecosystem approach. So at the top level, you got your products and services. I think we all know where that sits. But when you start to build at a national and a regional level, you need to look at the human capital. Again, it's coming back to the education aspects. You need the industry base and support. You need the infrastructure and you need the international partnerships because space is a global value chain in a way. And then right at the bottom, you need to underscore how you do the missions, your research, development and innovation, your operations, space applications. But when you frame your national space program or regional space program, you need to look at policy and law, and then your strategy in terms of which direction you're pushing, your agenda and your business models. Next slide. So how can we leverage on current capabilities? I think there was a mention of Digital Earth Africa. So this is the DataCube platform, which will essentially house satellite imagery. And on that platform, we can build products and services. Just the next click. So at the moment, SANSA has been identified as the program management, hosting the program management office for Digital Earth Africa, and we'll also support the operations of Digital Earth Africa. And there's a number of key partners like the Council for Geosciences in Australia, Amazon Web Services, the World Economic Forum. So there's big investors also into this Digital Earth Africa platform. And we've got to see what the synergies is between Digital Earth Africa and GMES Africa, rather than having two disparate systems in Africa. So how do we have a conversation around convergence? Next slide. I'm looking at it from a national perspective as well. And the reason why I'm doing that is because from an African space policy perspective, when we're building up the African space program, there's a policy principle that says leverage and bootstrap what you have at a national level. So as an example, one of the facilities, this was a picture taken 2 days ago. This is a new space weather center that's being built in South Africa at the agency. And this will be ready in the first quarter of next year. But this is meant to service the entire aviation sector on the African continent. So there's a new set of regulations that's passed by ICAO that says that the aviation sector must have space weather information on board. So how do we use this from an African perspective, but match it from the European perspective as well? Next slide. We're also looking, we've got this, maybe taking the conversation to the next level. We have the comprehensive strategy with Africa that was commissioned by the European Commission. So we've got about 10 different priority areas that's been identified. And so this has been more or less couched from the European Commission side in consultation with the African Union. But I think what's important, if you go to the next slide, when you're looking at it from a space sector point of view, you need to ensure that there's a policy grounding on the African side as well. So when you're looking at the agenda setting, it needs to be sort of balanced on both sides, okay? So when we look at the space segment specifically, let's look at the objectives and the policy principles that's enshrined in the African space policy. So here you see the high level objectives of the African space policy. And within each, there's a set or a suite of principles that Africa must abide or adhere to in terms of giving effect to the African space program. So how do we bring that conversation in terms of the European Commission agenda for Africa? Next slide. So in terms of looking at the collaborative perspectives between Africa and Europe, and I think there was a comment that Tidiane made, let's not look at it from a commission to commission perspective, but from a regional perspective, Africa, Europe. So when you look at it from the Africa perspective, we need to, in terms of embracing and the space sector, how do we ensure that we harness that benefits coming from space science technology to address our socioeconomic issues? The second point is around, let's look at a mutually beneficial partnership. So again, I'm making the point, we should move away from a donor-recipient type of relationship, but look at a mutually beneficial partnership. And then, as I said, when I started off my first slide, let's look at building local capacity so that we have intelligent users of products and services on the African side. And then on the European side perspective, sharing of your experiences and how you bring in government, industry, and society together, and seeing how we can borrow that learning on the African side will also be very useful. And then also assist in bridging what I call the science divide. I'm not talking about the space divide here, because if you think about it very carefully, your space sector is actually sitting on your science policy perspective. So even in South Africa, we sit in the science and technology and innovation space. So your science policy becomes very important in terms of how you ground your space programs. So maybe understanding it much broader in terms of science policy perspective, capacity development, knowledge and technology transfers, co-development and joint collaboration. And I think those are the kinds of conversation points that we should be having in terms of this collaboration. And then my last slide is just to indicate that from the African perspective, we've put up policy principles down in terms of the African space policy, African space strategy. So I think we're starting to gear up in terms of changing our identity, but also to take into consideration when we're looking at this particular partnership, we have to look at the technology maturity perspective in terms of how we frame and move the partnership forward. So we have to take that in cognizance. So that this picture is kind of demonstrate that when we're engaging at a system to system level between Africa and Europe, you have to take this nuancing into perspective as well. So that's my introduction. Thanks, Etim.
Thank you, Val. And if I may just highlight maybe three things which you've said. I mean, all the things you said are very important. One of the things I noted is that Africa and Europe should move away from a donor recipient kind of framework or mentality and go into something which is more co-developmental, if I may put it that way. And then you also mentioned about the two Earth observation projects going on at the GMES and the Digital Earth Africa, that we should try to work towards a convergence of the two. And of course, I already see a convergence happening because like Tidiane is managing the GMES and Africa project and is also on the board of Digital Earth Africa. And South Africa, which is hosting the PMO for Digital Earth Africa, is also a regional implementing center for GMES. So I think that's already happening, but we can take that further. And of course, you also made reference to the strategy which was released by the EU in March last year. No, it was March this year. I think it was March last year, yeah, towards a comprehensive strategy for Africa. And so, well, we've not seen anything from the African side, but I guess Tidiane will speak to that, what Africa is also having in mind towards Europe. Thank you very much, Val. And then now I call on Professor Nicolas Peter, who more or less will try and put this EU-AU partnership or Europe-Africa partnership within an international framework or international system. Professor Peter?
Thank you, Etim. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm really happy to be invited to be in this panel with so many colleagues and friends that have already eloquently spoke about the issue. So I will try now indeed to put the glue together and come with a different perspective and focus at this stage on the E and the A. So E for Europe and A for Africa, because first we need also to define what are we talking about. Because for instance, for Europe, we may all mention the term, but we don't have necessarily the same understanding of what does it mean. Are we talking about the 27 European Union context, the 22 member state ESA context, the 30 member states context of EUMETSAT, Council of Europe 47. The same goes on the African side where you have the EU with 55 countries and the individual countries. And also there are also sub-regional groups dynamics over the continent. So that's one of the first things we have to understand is what are we talking about? And that's why Tidiane mentioned 3 questions, and I will add a 4th one, the whom, because that's also an important element to talk and to discuss. Because here, if we want to engage into relations, Val had a nice proverb, I will quote another one, an African proverb that said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring someone, go together. But here, what is also important to realize is that the reason why states, if we stay at the states level, engage into space activities vary from country to country. And in Europe, as well as in Africa, there are a lot of variants. Both continents are very different, I know, in terms of geography, needs, abilities, history, language, cultures, but there's a lot of variations. But if a country wants to engage into space, it does because it has its own national objectives that are embedded in the international context. And usually they create either a space agency or part of a structure in a ministry. That's the 2 main ways states engage into cooperation. And space agency is the biggest one. There are more than 65 space agencies in the world, while more than 85 countries are involved into in the space activities. And also, when a country creates an agency or structure to cooperate, as Val was mentioning, was it's either to exchange knowledge transfer. And there are different levels in these relations. There are different stages, and I see 4 main stages. First, the one is when someone purchases a service. The second one is a country developed this in partnership. The third one is when where a country developed it independently. And the fourth one is when the one that has the capability share it with other ones. So if you take these 4 stages, you can see there are a lot of interaction between phase 2 and phase 4. That being said, we're also living in a new geopolitical context, and some of the questions in the chat already hinted towards that. Because new axes of cooperation are deepening, because there are more actors. There's an internationalization and globalization of the space sector, north-south, south-north. But also some of these alliances are weakening. So this is also something to take into account, that we're looking at the past, but we look at the future with a different mindset. The future will be different than the past, and we need to get ready for that. So space agency is one of the models that states, there are different models for states, but space agency is the one that is mostly used. Then at regional level / continental level, there are also different models where states decide to work together in the field of space with particular reason and different dimension. In Europe, there is the ESA model, the EUMETSAT model, the European Commission with, for instance, the USPA. In Asia, there are different models, EPIRSAF, APSCO. Latin America, since last week, created a new intergovernmental agency. And there is the African model with the Space Agency of the African Union. So I agree also with what has been said. Africa has its own identity, but needs also to find its way. The same way, for instance, that in the field of international relations, you have the concept of Ubuntu vis-à-vis Africa and international relations. In space, it needs also to find its own identity, because it's really important to take into account that the European space context is evolving. The same goes in Africa. And there are a lot of already, we've talked about the EU, we've talked about the European Commission, Val presented the view of South Africa, but there are different other axes of cooperation. And just to give some example, France is very involved with countries such as Senegal, South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya. Turkey is in discussion with Somalia, Rwanda and Mauritius with Japan, Ethiopia and Sudan with China. That also adds complexity to what we are discussing. There are different relations for different objectives. The same in terms of capabilities that are on the African side is very diverse. You have about, out of the 55 countries, you have 10 to 11 countries that have mature capabilities. In total, they invest, depending on the number, between 250 million to 500 million US dollars per year. That's between 0.3 and 0.7% of global public investment into space, but with different capabilities. So what we have to take into account is that it is very diverse. Something that Val mentioned that is also important is to go away from this dependence. But I would like to enlarge the discussion, because the relation between Africa and Europe in the space sector is not only about space. This would be a big mistake to think it's only about space, because I've given some example of space-to-space relations. Jolanda, for instance, mentioned some example of space to non-space, for instance, with the Earth civil navigation. That's something also Val touched upon. This is something that is important. So space used by non-space domains. And the last one is space with foreign aid activities. And that's something people do not really realize, that in this type of equation, you have non-space players that are shaping the discussion or involved into the discussion. For instance, on the European level, you have the European Investment Bank that helps with RN Group to fund the development of certain capabilities in Ethiopia. You had also partners, the National Development Aid Agency, for instance, GMES in Germany, AFD in France, Enabel in Belgium, that have allocated funds to have space projects linked with Africa. But usually those development aid agencies do not interact with the space people in their home country. So that then complicates the relations, but that gives us also a chance on the African side to be able to leverage different type of partnership in order to develop his own reality. Now, to conclude, just I want to add another element into that, is that the same way there is not only one space clear or structured way of doing space. In Europe, the same goes in Africa. There are national space agencies, countries involved in space. We've heard about the African Union, but there are also other regional activities. Etim, for instance, you were part of two, under the leadership of the UN, on the English-speaking one part in Nigeria. There is another one in Morocco for the French-speaking part. But there are also at least four or five specific on regional activities with different membership already in Africa. And then if you add on top of it, different member states relations with different groups, being it the Arabsat, for instance, membership in the north of the continent, ITSESCO, the BRICS, that adds also to complexity if you want to have a clear, coordinated discussions, because on both sides it's very fragmented. So, and finally, also to mention that there are countries or entities from Europe having space capabilities on the continent. I could mention Senegal and France, Italy and Kenya, that where they are receiving ground receiving station for ESA's launchers. You know, when the launch from Guyana is done, that's really helpful to be able to compare, to track that. So with the downrange, Gabon, not Senegal. So there are a lot of things, and we also, Europe is also cooperating with South Africa on certain things, but we need to find good ways and good ways to cooperate, but also we need to identify new topics of cooperation, because the context is changing. You have more actors at the institutional level, more countries investing into space, more countries wishing to cooperate, but also on the private sector with the new space revolution that is leading to a hybrid context that we really need to take into account and to adapt on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea to see how can we work better together.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thanks for your intervention. One of the things I've noted importantly is that there are different levels of cooperation or collaboration. Between the EU and the AU, we can talk about the ESA level with a smaller number of countries, or EU level with a different set of countries, some of them overlapping, or even at Europe level, because there are some bilateral, direct bilateral collaboration between countries. And then you can even leave that context and go to the international framework and see how different models also operate in Asia Pacific region, in Latin America, and different regions. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions, and participants are welcome to contribute to the discussion, either by comments or questions in the chat box. I'll quickly start this session by a quick question to Jolanda, following the contribution from Tidiane, which is that what has been done so far in terms of the cooperation between EU and the AU. A couple of projects have been mentioned, GMES in Africa, Egnos in Africa. What is the status of these projects? Of course, for most of these projects, it is for this particular one, it's the AUC that is implementing them. From the view of the EU or from the EC, what is the performance of this project? And he also said, what needs to be done? What other opportunities are there for cooperation between Europe and Africa, or between the EU and the AU?
Thank you, Etim. Okay, some quick words from me in this respect. I think from our side, the cooperation is very beneficial, and I think this is not only because the things we have invested in, let me put it like that, like the establishment of Copernicus or Egnos, that this is used in Africa, but it is in particular, I think, the fact that space data and services which are delivered can also benefit really the people on the ground. This is the same for Europe as it is for Africa. We don't do this, and I think this is very important. You don't establish a satellite constellation just for the sake of having a satellite constellation. What you need to ensure is that the data and the services which are delivered can actually be useful as well on the ground. As I said as well, in particular for Earth observation, from our perspective, it helps to fight climate change, to actually monitor the environment and the biodiversity. And of course, some of the problems could be different for Europe or for Africa, but we all face the climate change consequences. So the GMES Africa project is very important in this respect, where the first phase is ongoing, and I think this already bears fruit. For Egnos or SBAS, the two systems, I think it's important as well to show, and there we have, I think, a joint effort to be made between Europe and Africa to show indeed the potential of these kind of systems, not only for the aviation sector, but also for other sectors. As I said before, for agriculture, it can be helpful, and also for other areas. This is important. And then I think for the future, from our perspective, as Europe is also developing other things, I think there is potential for further cooperation in terms of, for instance, secure connectivity and satellite communication. These kind of things which are developed can indeed also be used by others. And this is, I think, the indication we have. So from our perspective, the ongoing cooperation is beneficial, and we have indeed a lot of potential also for the future.
Thank you, Jolanda. And Tidiane, I want you to maybe add to that, maybe respond to one of the questions which I see here. Someone is asking, Usman Ngom, is the Europe-Africa Space Cooperation a win-win cooperation? So from the African side, how do you view this cooperation so far? And one of the questions which you pointed out was the how. How do we want to continue? How do we do this together? So going forward, knowing how far we have come, how do we go on from here?
Thank you very much, Etim. I can give the impression that really I didn't say a lot. I wanted to follow your schema of the panel because you were asking to have 5-minute introduction, but I realized that I have taken this opportunity to explain more, but it's okay. That being said, the why is very important. Before, assessing something, you have to understand, why you were in that something. It is important why space collaboration between Europe and Africa. From the African perspective, it is very clear. It is in our Agenda 2063. We have the priorities of Africa. Space is coming as a means to support the implementation of these priorities. Therefore, I will not talk about the 4 segments because there are several examples, meaning Earth observation, navigation and positioning, timing, satellite communication, then the astronomy and space science. Just taking the Earth observation segment, and GMS in Africa is the implementation leg of that segment. GMS in Africa is a big success. It's one of the priorities of the Agenda 2063 is the blue economy. It is about marine coastal areas. It is about natural resources and water. How space, in the case of GMS in Africa, how Copernicus data can help developing services. GMS is a success. I will give you some result quickly on the 4 outputs. The first output being infrastructure in data. Thanks to GMS in Africa, we've empowered and strengthened 12 new institutions that got an e-station with the support from UMESAT, GRC, and ESA, European Space Agency. When you add these 12 stations to the existing 188 stations coming from previous projects, you already have 200. Again, that is a win because the institutions have infrastructures to acquire data. Secondly, the service development. Under GMS in Africa, there are 11 services developed on land and water management, resource management, and 8 on marine and coastal areas. That is fantastic. In training, there are more than 3,000 trainees, thanks to GMS in Africa, now on Earth observation. And the trainees are not some people, they train and we left, or we leave. These are part of the institutions, working in the institutions. Between bracket, GMS in Africa, it is 120, more than 120 African institutions covering all the African regions. Therefore, it is a win situation for us. In terms of awareness, thanks to GMS in Africa, we've succeeded in convincing several decision makers in different African countries to look at space as a socio-economic activity. And that is critical and that is very important. This is why the momentum today in looking at the future is to say that the landscape has changed in Africa. You have those who were in space for a while, for countries well known, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Nigeria. You have the newcomers, Ethiopia, Kenya, etc. But the big chunk of the African countries, I would say all the African countries are the big consumers of space product. And when we speak about space, it is not Earth observation. Even if we talk about navigation and positioning for the aviation, for us, it is a space product. Telecommunication, African population is more than 1 billion. If I tell you the number of African citizens using mobile phone, you cannot believe in it. Therefore, the connectivity, which is an issue, thanks to the new development in space, will be resolved, and that will open a huge potential of the market. There is a lot to say. These are concrete examples. Egnos. Okay. Egnos GPU is another typical example. Yeah. Therefore, we have a lot to say, but the structure of the panel is, limiting us. But it is a win-win situation. Yeah. To be very short, we are appreciating this collaboration. Yes, there are rooms for improvement. We need to collaborate to discuss on where we can improve. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tidiane, for pointing out the areas of benefits that Africa and Europe are deriving from the collaboration. I'll just call on Val, speaking from the national level now. Of course, the AUC is representing the 55 member states. So actually, the AUC more or less is speaking on behalf of the 55 member states. One of the things you pointed out in your presentation was the comprehensive strategy which the EU released last year. So from the member state perspective, what do you expect the AUC to present to the EU on behalf of Africa? What should be our strategy going forward? What should be our areas of, what should we work on basically?
No, thanks, Etim. So just by the way, Africa has its agenda sort of set up in Agenda 2063. There's aspirations that's embedded in Agenda 2063. And I think if you look at it from an SDG point of view, the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063, there's quite a good overlap. And I should mention also, it's quite interesting because one of the working papers in developing Agenda 2030, the STGs, was a common African position that informed the Agenda 2063. So the 20 goals of the Agenda 2063 and the 17 goals, there's quite a neat overlap. So all countries essentially are signed up to the SDGs. So if you take that overlap, there's a neat sort of collaboration that can be teased out in terms of how Africa can address the socio-economic and environmental issues on the African side. And the one thing I should mention about the SDGs, even though over 190 countries have signed up, every country is responsible, but no one is in charge. And that comes back to the governance issue. And I think even in this relationship, we talked about the need for equal partnerships. Let's look at, for example, we were talking about system to system dialogues, look at from an Africa-Europe perspective. And so the governance becomes very key in all of this. And I think that's the critical success factor in terms of the relationship. And then we can use that effectively to address the socioeconomic issues in Agenda 2063 and the STGs, both from the European and the African. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Val. And then I come to you, Nicolas. Looking at your position, of course, I know you were at ISA at the time, at DLR at the time, but now at the ISU, given that global perspective. So what are the typical challenges of space cooperation, especially for big programs like we have between the EU and the AU, and how can those challenges be surmounted so that as we go forward, we know how to kind of do adjustments in the projects we are doing right now or the projects we want to embark on?
Yes, thank you. I think it's seeing some of the question, hearing you in the chat, hearing your question and some of the discussion, it really shows how timely it is to have this type of discussion, because we need to bring different perspectives together. And because some of the examples of the program that have been mentioned are a lot European Union driven programs. Galileo and Copernicus and Egnos provide clearly benefits to the continent, and I think this is good. But if we want, like Val said before, to go beyond the donor relation, we also need to understand that certain countries in Africa are developing their own capabilities, and there are different numbers that are going around, but just this year, Tunisia and Mauritius launched their first satellite, their own national satellite. So it's foreseen to have 20 countries by 2024 having satellites being developed for Africa, in space. So that means half of the country, almost half of the country, will be, having some technical capabilities of space hardware. So up to now, we've seen Africa, if you take the continent as a whole and put maybe South Africa and Nigeria and Egypt on the side, it's mainly being as a user of space, because data is becoming available thanks to the great effort of Copernicus, for instance, with the free and open data policy. So data is there. So we see a lot of downstream application being used on the continent. That being said, there are also other countries that are developing hardware, and that's for different reasons. But something for me that is clear that I would like to stress, and that it would be important maybe for the continent to avoid unnecessary duplication of infrastructure. Because as I mentioned in my introductory speech, there are different models of regional cooperation that all came in a specific context. And in Africa, there's also countries that were involved before that have certain capabilities. And we should maybe, in the continent, and I'm not there, I don't have an answer, but in my view, we should avoid unnecessary duplication. Maybe some duplication might be good, but some might be unnecessary. And there is need to be discussed across the continent, across different players, not to avoid that everyone develop the same type of capability and miss some other one. So here there needs to have some dialogue, some coordination into that, and certainly the African Union has a role to play, but there are different ways to do it. So also, if you want to look forward with optimism into the future, it's important to realize that while African countries are getting more involved, either with a structure and some programs, there is two dimensions that need to be taken into account. One was mentioned by Val before, which is the human capital development, and this is key. You need to have educated workforce that can use and develop space, but also attract the general population towards STEM in general. I think this is important for the continent. But also something that is important that has not been discussed today is to provide a policy and legal framework. We've talked about governance that was discussed, but we need also to realize that very few countries on the continent have a national space policy. Very few. Nigeria, South Africa, very few have a legal system to regulate space activities, again, South Africa, while 20% of the COPUOS members in the UN system are from Africa. 55% of the African countries signed the Outer Space Treaty. But then we need also, there's a lot of efforts that needs to be done at the African level to put that into context, to say that developing space activities, and especially hardwares, comes with good rules of the road and behavior. You need to be part of the global discussion on the topic. So I think there maybe we need also to develop a new model, and then maybe Africa has its way with this Ubuntu concept to say, okay, big brother helping smaller brothers or the community to develop that. But it's important that there is experience shared by leading countries on the continent and share experience with other ones. That's why maybe a regional, sub-regional approach could help bringing different countries, different regions together, because they all have different specificities. So I think this is also we need to develop human capital and policy and legal context.
Thank you, Professor Peter. And clearly, it's an importance to develop a policy and strategic and maybe governance framework. Of course, both continents have that separately, but maybe there's a way to work together.
But Etim, if I may just interrupt you, for instance, there is not such thing as an African Space Policy Institute on the continent. And this is something that you could see. It's also important to have this type of third NGO type of activities where, for instance, I would be happy to engage with people on the continent to try to develop, to share experience, to have also this capacity building on the continent. And this is my view, something that could evolve completely independently from the EU system, because it could be scholars, bring them together, working with the EU, working with member states, but this is something that is missing.
Okay, well, I think you want to respond.
Yeah, I wanted to come in on that, Nicolas. We'll take the offer up. Actually, Etim and I wrote a policy paper that was published on the need for an African Space Policy Institute. So I think we're thinking along the same lines. So let's have a conversation.
And still speaking about the law and governance, Kai Uwe, who is coming up in the second panel, I think he's going to speak a bit more on that. So I think we can just jump into the second panel because it's already.
Etim, if you allow me.
Yeah.
If you allow me, because.
Yeah, briefly, please, so that we can start the second panel.
Yeah, briefly. Talking about the governance about space in Africa without mentioning the African Space Agency, it would be a crime. Okay, and the African Space Agency has been created. It is one of the continental first piece in terms of governance. We are talking about the regulatory. One of the key objectives of the African Space Agency will be to create that regulatory framework. Not all African countries have the same means to afford space, but all of them need space products and services. Secondly, creating an indigenous capacity. Because when we talk about capacity, I want to quote my mentor here online, Dr. Adigun, who first said, the human capital, it is good to talk about capacity building. Are we talking also about capacity utilization? It is very important. Space is not relatively new in Africa, mainly Earth observation. Over the last 30 to 40 years, a lot of Africans have been trained. Today, where are they? Did we use them properly, efficiently? The African Space Agency is coming as the governance body at the continental level for not only the programs, but for the policy matter, but also for the regulatory matters. We'll have an opportunity to explain more in other fora, but it is clear that there are several things we are talking about. We don't have too much time to speak about. There are some plans for that. You have to be aware of that before proposing, because we all say African models. Who should do the African models? It is the African themselves, with the support from others. Therefore, what the Africans put in the pipeline should be where we should start the discussion if we really want to help Africa. Thank you, Etim, and I will stop here because I know, and thanks for the opportunity for the minutes.
Yeah, we continue the discussion. I just want to invite more people to join the panel. I've noted that a few more questions have come up on the chat box, and I will take them once the new people we are bringing to join the panel, once they make their opening remarks. So to join the discussion is Dr. Adigun Abiodun, Dr. Agnieszka Lukaszczyk, Dr. Emmanuel Nkurunziza, Vivian Mehta, and Professor Kaihuwe Shrago. I'll just introduce them briefly, and then I give them the floor to make their opening remarks before we continue with the discussion. So Dr. Adigun Abiodun, a Nigerian, is an alumnus of the University of Washington, Seattle, in the US, where he obtained his PhD in hydraulics and hydrology. He worked with as an hydraulic engineer at the US Army Corps of Engineers in Seattle. He was a senior lecturer at the University of Ife, now called Obafemi University in Nigeria, and then spent a study leave at the Canada Center for Remote Sensing before joining the United Nations Outer Space Affairs Division in 1977. In 1981, he was appointed the UN expert on space applications, a post which he held until his retirement in September 1999. And in that capacity, he led efforts to build indigenous capacity in space science and technology in developing countries, including the center which I mentioned earlier, that's the African Regional Center for Space Science and Technology Education. Of course, there are other centers in India, in Brazil, in Jordan, in Morocco, just like Nicolas also mentioned. Since his retirement, he has served as a member of the College of Commissioners of the UN Monitoring, Verification and Inspection Commission on Iraq. That's the UN MOVIC, which was supposed to check for the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He also served as the special assistant to the president of Nigeria on space science and technology. He was elected and served as the chairman of the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is the global body where space issues or space affairs are discussed. He's a member of several bodies, including the Association of Space Explorers. He also led the founding of several institutions, including the African Association for Remote Sensing, as well as the African Leadership for Space Science and Technology, the ASLC. Dr. Agnieszka Lukaszczyk is the Vice President for Government Affairs for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Planet Labs. A Polish-American national, she has worked with the European Commission Directorate for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, and SMEs, Space Data for Societal Challenges and Growth Units. She has also worked at the Directorate General for Enterprise and Industry, Space Policy, and Research Unit. Before joining the EC, she was the Brussels Office Director for the Secure World Foundation. In addition, she was a former chairperson and, of course, former executive director of the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is the body of young professionals across the globe. Agnieszka also worked at the European Space Policy Institute, which Nicolas mentioned earlier. She serves as the Vice President, Europe for the World Space Week and sits on the board of directors for the Women in Aerospace Europe. She obtained a PhD in space security at the Polish University of War Studies. She also holds a master's degree from the Warsaw School of Economics in Management of Space in New Economics and a master's degree from the American University School of International Service in International Politics. I think there are so many things I could go on and on, but I'll just stop there because of time. Dr. Emmanuel Nkurunziza, I hope I pronounced the name well, is the Director General of Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, RCMRD. RCMRD is an international organization with 20 contracting member states in Eastern and Southern Africa. It's one of the implementing bodies of the GMES and Africa. He took up this position earlier this year after an 8-year tenure as the Director General of the Rwanda Natural Resources Authority. And in that position, he also he was concurrently the Chief Registrar of Land Titles. He has an academic background in land surveying and holds a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Wales and a PhD in public policy from the University of Birmingham. Ms. Vivian Mehta is the Director of Business and Technical Services at Locate IT Limited, a space and geomatics company based in Nairobi, Kenya. She has vast experience in the use and application of GIS, Earth observation, surveying, and GIT technologies. A geomatics engineering graduate, she's involved in managing and coordinating the execution of Locate IT's geospatial projects, including those entailing policy formulation, implementation, development, monitoring, and evaluation. She's also involved in business development as a project manager and plays an instrumental role in the implementation of flagship projects developed, conceptualized, and implemented by Locate IT. Locate IT is also one of the implementing organizations for the GMES and Africa initiative. The last but not the least is Professor Kai Uwe Shrogo, whom I guess many of us here know very well. He's the president of the International Institute of Space Law. He's currently seconded from the European Space Agency, ESA, to the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy in Berlin to support the German presidency of the Council of the European Union. And maybe I may just chip in here that from January next year, France will be taking over the presidency of the European Council, and that's interesting for the EU-Africa relations because of the close relationship between France and Africa. And of course, Kai Uwe will want to talk more about that when he's speaking. Until 1939, he was the Chief Strategy Officer of ESA in Paris. He has also served as the Director of the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna. He has also served as the head of the Corporate Development and External Relations Department of the German Aerospace Center, which is the German Aerospace Agency. I'll just mention that he has also served as the chairman of the legal subcommittee of UN CUPUS, which Dr. Abiodun served as the chairman. There are other things I could mention, but I'll just also conclude that he's a professor for international technology policy at Tübingen University, Germany. I hope I pronounced that well. He has also written several books and published, made several publications. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I'll just give the floor to Dr. Abiodun to start off with his opening remarks. We can hear you. You're still muted. Dr. Abiodun, you're still muted. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Dr. Abiodun, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you. Hold on.
Sorry, I'm sorry for, just as a reminder, I would encourage speakers to try and keep to 5 minutes for the opening remarks so that you can continue the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. We are here today to address how space science and technology can and should meet our basic needs as well as fulfill our obligations. One of those obligations include how to ensure the safety of this fragile spaceship we call Earth, particularly for future generations. In the process, we must recognize that the challenges of the 21st century consist of mutually evolving and building essential and critical knowledge that can serve as tools of development, identifying the appropriate levels at which to employ these tools, and imbibing the people skills needed to foster cooperation between and among countries. Knowledge generation and sharing across national, regional, and continental boundaries in space science and technology, and enduring political commitment to mutually beneficial programs are part of this process. In coming here, Etim asked us to look in this session at the role of industry, academia, research institutions, and civil society in Europe and Africa, with reference to the EU-AU space relations. And so basically, that's what I'm going to focus on. And to begin with, I'm looking at the issue of human capacity building. Many of the last speakers touched on that, but I'm going to touch on exactly what actually got done. And at the UN did several things. One is the center Etim mentioned, the Regional Centers for Space Science and Technology, which was put in place just to enable the graduates of these centers to serve as nucleus of space science and technology development in their respective countries. Then we tried further, we look at a project called Copine. And in that project, the goal of that project it was started in the 1990s, and that was to empower African universities, among others, with the ability to bridge the growing development gap and participate in the new global market. So how did we do? We managed to get a lot of European countries to participate in this program. We did a lot of traveling, and Switzerland offered us its link to some of the European satellites. But in the final analysis, there were too many competing interests, and the project died, so to speak, even though its priority areas of interest were exchange of scientific and technical information among the universities, management of natural resources and the environment, teleeducation, and telehealth. But I have some good news to share today on that. And that is, as we speak, the World Bank and a private entity known as Knowledge Consulting Limited, they are looking at the possibility, not of reviving Copine, because I don't think they are calling their own project Copine, but trying to come up with a program similar to Copine, built almost like Copine, but with the goal of helping the African universities and other post-secondary education institutions on the continent to high-speed internet. I don't have to go through the money involved, but through that effort, they are also asking for private investors to participate. And on my part, while I have the floor, I'm asking the question, can there be a role for the EU, Africa space relations in this effort? Then when you want to go into academia in developing countries, particularly in Africa, why are you doing that? Not only to develop what you need at home, but to interact with the international community. Africa and Europe are now trying to interact, but you cannot interact without taking your academia along with you, because what is going to impact the success of this EU-Africa space relations is what everybody brings to the table. And therefore, I'm proposing that African countries should take a look at some of the programs in many other countries, such as attracting foreign-based research scientists, because no man is an island, and you can learn from them and they can learn from you. And through those learning processes, you gain a lot of things. Then there are a lot of projects from the Third World Academy of Sciences. Countries like the United States have what we call research grants in different areas, and you have to do this to be able to expose yourself globally. Now, in that exposure, Africa needs to realize that it is no longer as the norm to give a university student his or her diploma and say you've graduated. One of the major things being done today is in the area of building entrepreneurship within the university system. That is bringing the students, their professors, and the industries together with the backing of the countries. And there are a lot of universities in Europe that are doing this. I only mentioned about 3 of them: Cranfield University in UK, Tenka University in Munich, Germany, and Politecnico in Madrid. These are institutions that are doing all of this. And so that by the time the student finishes her education, he or she is already interested or has already built interest and capability in what to do with that education, either to start a business or to do something else. Now, again, Etim wants us to look at how to nurture private sector, but private sector does not get nurtured by itself. Most developing countries must see it as a strategy that needs to reinforce the can-do mentality of its people, because it will stimulate local investment, it will challenge the indigenous investors and their employees to give up their best. And such an approach, supposedly and hopefully, will eventually result in products that are acceptable and investment worthy in the international market, okay? And when you do private sector development, then particularly for the African countries, I have a major example to propose, and that is the European Union Horizon 2020 strategy. That strategy provides new funding to support and implement government-backed early stage, high risk research and development innovations. Now, these innovations today are doing what? They are championing the participation of Europe in the downstream markets, particularly of Earth observation systems. Now, Brazil is doing the same thing by passing several laws which stimulate the application of industrial funds for research, and by putting in place a beneficial patent law in this country. Now, for me, coming from Nigeria and also from Africa, one of the things I find very difficult to understand and challenging is that the universities have very little role to play today. Maybe tomorrow is going to change. But at present, most African universities do not have significant roles to play in their space programs. But they need to realize that space as we know it today started mostly from the universities. It was JPL with the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena that led the United States to be what it is today. In India, it was a lot of professors that joined together as members of COSPA that brought space into being in India. In Japan, It all started in mid-1950s with rocket research at the University of Tokyo. For Africa to be an effective partner in the EU-Africa space relations activities, its universities should be integral parts of its respective national space programs. Now, and then—
Sorry, Dr. Abiodun, if you could just round up so that we give opportunity.
Yes, I'm almost finished. So, but the question then is, to do this, we sort of felt that there should be a role for the civil society. And the civil society in Africa need to help African countries address three things: what they should know about space, and the choices they need to make, and how to help them to build these programs to meet the needs of the people. Finally, the goal of EU space space relations is collaboration. But what is collaboration? Collaboration at the international level can only be accomplished if it has been developed at the national level, cemented at the regional level, and then it can be transmitted into an intercontinental level. Because each country will need to practice collaboration locally by integrating its three pillars of research, of know-how, and related skills. The research is brought in by the universities or the academia, the know-how by the private industry, and the funding by the government. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, African countries should know that in the space age of today, countries that are able to help themselves, that invest in the generation of knowledge and can contribute to innovations, are often enthusiastically welcomed to interact at the research and development levels with their counterparts within the space-faring and space-capable communities of the world. Accordingly, Africa must cultivate and nurture such a character if it's to be highly regarded, as well as be an effective partner in the EU-AU space relations and in other international circles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abiodun, and thanks for the new input into the discussion. When we started earlier, we talked a bit more about the programs on Earth observation, that's the GMES and Africa, Digital Earth Africa, and of course, the program on Egnos. But if you introduce something that has to do with satellite communication, the COPINE project, which the EU supported at the initial stage, and of course, you talked about provision of internet, and I see a question from Ajijola, which is concerns the issue of internet provision from Starlink, which maybe later you may want to respond to. You've also highlighted some roles that stakeholders can play: industry, private sector, civil society. Thank you, and I'll just give the floor to Agnieszka, who is coming from the industry, to give our opening remarks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for having me here, because I think that my viewpoints are going to be a little bit different, because I am coming from the private sector, and I do believe that today, when we are facing so many challenges in the world, when we talk about collaboration, it's not just between Europe and Africa, but it's about different levels of the sector. So public sector and private sector and academia and NGOs, we all should work together in order to really make an impact and take advantage of these technologies and these solutions that we have. There was an interesting question earlier. Somebody asked, why should Africa cooperate with Europe? And I think the question shouldn't be why, but how. And it shouldn't be just about Europe. It should be about the world, really. When you look at space technology, I think what is very unique about it is that it has a global impact. And like I said, given the climate change and loss of biodiversity, and natural phenomena. And those are all global issues, and we're not just going to solve them regionally. So it's very, very important that we work together on it, and that the industry is part of that solution. So at Planet, I don't know how many of you know about Planet, but Planet is a mission-driven company, which is very important that I underline that, because we're a private company, but it's not just profits that drive us, it's also our mission. This is how our co-founders actually started this company, with mission in mind to use these technologies to really impact and improve life on Earth. And we work with governments worldwide, and we work with international organizations and NGOs to make sure that the source and this tool that Earth observation offers is really used globally and worldwide. So obviously, as you have heard, there are lots of great programs, public programs, that offer data on free and open basis, Copernicus being one of them. There's also Landsat program of the US, which works in a very similar fashion. And those are great programs that I think should be taken advantage of for sure. Now, they're not going to answer all the questions that are there. They are part of the solution. And I think when you combine different data sources, this is where you actually get the right insight. Because at the end of the day, the end users, they don't really care about data, let's be honest. What they want to know answers to their questions, the answers to their problems. They want to have solutions. So raw data is great, but if you don't know what to do with it, then it's useless. So it's really important to work together with the downstream sector, with companies, and train also, for instance, local companies in Africa who can take that data, turn it into something useful, so that your country or your region benefits from it, but also you have business that is growing based on that data that is being provided by satellites. There have been several studies done, and it was mentioned in the beginning about Sustainable Development Goals, and 14 out of those 17 goals can be helped with Earth observation alone. Like, now this is crazy. This is like majority of them. And obviously Earth observation is not the silver bullet, and it's not going to solve our problems, all of our problems, but it's a big part of the solution. And I think we should really take it seriously. And this is something where we can really work together on. Now, I think international collaboration is the key. I think it's extremely important. I am very sad when I see on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US, and in Europe now, a lot of protectionism, where politics play a larger role in decision making rather than the solutions that these data sources can offer. So I hope that is going to change, and we can actually really work together on moving forward. But let me tell you what Planet is doing. So, like I said, we work with lots of institutions. And one of our biggest programs that we're doing right now, it's a program called NICFI. It's a program where our data, with Norwegian government actually, and this is actually a great model to show how governments can work with industry to really empower end users in having access to this sort of data. So obviously we cannot give all our data for free, because we would go bankrupt. Space is an expensive business, and we have to meet our ends meet. But at the same time, we should do it in such a way that is really fostering progress. So this NICFI program that I've mentioned is a program where the Norwegian government actually is buying data in a heavily discounted rate from us. It's us and Airbus is also part of the consortium, and that data is bought in a very heavily discounted rate, and then that data is given to FAO, and FAO then distributes this data for free to all the tropical countries with tropical forests, So pretty much everything on the 30 degrees of the equator, north and south. So all these countries in that belt get our data to monitor their forests, to stop deforestation, to help reforestation for free. And it's and Norwegian government is paying for it. Now, you would wonder, why would Norway pay for it? Well, because sometimes there are these good guys out there who actually look at the big picture, and forestry, it's a very big thing for Norway, and they think that this is a huge issue. So they decided that's how they decided to spend their money. And it's not crazy money. Like that's like, you know, a lot of people think that we're dealing with cosmos, therefore the prices are cosmic. They no longer are. This is really affordable business. So I think if you know, European countries or if the EU really wants to help, they can do something similar. They can buy data on a flat, heavily discounted rate, not just from Planet, from you know, lots of other providers, and distribute then that data for free to countries that need it. For instance, for a specific purpose. Yeah, it could be for agriculture, it could be for monitoring small island states, it could be for monitoring droughts or poaching or whatever the need is. But this is a very easy way where industry can work together with the public sector. When public sector you know, finances this, and countries in Africa and other parts of the world can really benefit from this space technology. Because you see, to be a player, to be an actor in the space sector, you don't need to have your own satellite. You don't need to have your own big space program. I know this is sexy and everybody wants to have their own satellite, everybody wants to have rocket, but you need to be also rational and see how much money, how much these things cost and what you can actually do with it. So a lot of times it's much more viable that you, instead of reinventing the wheel, you just procure what is already there, and make the best out of it. So I don't want to take too much time because I would really like to engage more in actual discussion and hear questions. So those are just like my general remarks, and looking forward to hear more from the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka, for pointing out the need for cooperation at different levels, not just continental level, not just commission level, but even across board, private sector, industry talking to industry, civil society talking to civil society. And I'm aware that during the summit between the AU and EU, usually there exists fora for private sector from both continents to interact for civil society. So I think we should strengthen that within the space domain also. I'll call on Viviane, since Agnieszka represents industry from Europe. So let me call on Viviane from the industry or private sector from Africa. Viviane Meta. Just as a reminder to try and stick to 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Etim, for the invitation to participate in this very high-level panel. And I must appreciate that very much. So,
I'm sorry, is it
my name is
possible
Viviane.
to see your face? Sorry.
Yes, you can see my face, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Can see me now clearly?
Yes, thank you.
All right, okay. So my name is Viviane Meta, and I represent Located Limited, as Etim had earlier on introduced me, currently as the Director of Business and Technical Services. So next slide, please. So when Etim reached out to me, basically he asked me to talk about some of the initiatives that as Locate IT we have been part of, you know, pulling from the EU Africa initiatives. So the structure of this presentation, of course, is slightly a bit about Locate IT and the initiatives, as well as really the EU success story that we're looking to have. Next slide. So Locate IT, as you may know already, is a GeoICT company that is based in Nairobi, Kenya. And we offer really products and services around geomatics and space. Next slide. So that's just some of the products that we have at Locate IT. Next slide, please. So basically, at the heart of fostering EU-Africa relations in Africa and globally, we believe that space and geomatics are the game changer, and that most importantly, it is very pertinent for all of us to realize that reliable data and reliable information are required for evidence-based decision-making, and that this information has to be translated into transformative initiatives or interventions. And that entirely, these initiatives that we do come up with should yield transformative societal impacts. So in all the initiatives that we try to be part of, we purpose to give life to what I've just gone through up there, which is the 3 Eyes framework. And this can be seen in some of the initiatives that we have been a part of in the last couple of years. Next slide. Okay. So as part of the Europe and Africa collaborations and going by our own experiences as asked to talk by Etim, I'm going to highlight some of the initiatives that we have been part of, bearing in mind the 3 Eyes frameworks that I just highlighted. And first and foremost is the Africultures Project, which is a program that is focused on developing a decision support tool that enhances food security in African agricultural systems, with the support of remote sensing. So Africultures, this is an EU Horizon 2020 funded project. And here we have about 17 implementing partners who have been pulled from across Europe and Africa, 8 being from Africa and 9 being from Europe. And within this framework, we have been able to develop various tools and services that are focused on climate, crop, drought, land, livestock, weather, and water. And all these are envisioned to improve decision-making for food security in Africa. Next slide. So second, as part of the EU-Africa initiatives, we also have what we have called the Gilimo Project. And this Gilimo Project basically is an example of a national and continental partnership through the French government and through the France-Africa collaboration. We have been implementing the Gilimo Project that is funded basically by the French Ministry of Finance and Economy. And it is implemented by 4 companies, that is Airbus, ITKG, Data, and ourselves, Located Limited, as a good example of how private sector collaborations, because all these institutions are private companies based both in France and in Kenya for ourselves. And we're piloting this project in Western Kenya. Basically, the project is looking to provide space and geomatics technologies, geospatial and modeling capabilities derived from satellite imagery to provide agronomic advice to agricultural authorities as well as farmers, and to be able to monitor crops throughout the season, able to support subsidy programs that our own governments are running, as well as enable or promote sustainable agriculture while contributing to food security. Next slide. So the third initiative, basically from the EU-Africa partnership, is the GMES and Africa program, which we have been part of, and we have implemented some initiatives around environmental wind erosion modeling. This is implemented particularly by the regional center that is also represented here for mapping of resources and development. And through this, we've developed tools to enable us, be able to monitor or come up with the index for land susceptibility to wind erosion for Eastern Africa region. This program basically is funded by the EU, as you may well be aware of, as well as the AU under the GMES and Africa framework. Next slide. So similar to that, relating again to the environmental modeling, we have been able to implement under the GMES and Africa program, what we call the Misland Project. Basically, this is a platform that enables users from Northern Africa through the OSS, which is an observatory of the Sahara and Sahel region, to be able to monitor land degradation in the entire Northern Africa. So particularly, this is a program, again, funded by GMES and Africa for under the AU and Africa, AU and EU partnership. Next slide. So lastly, I think one of the biggest things that I really need to reiterate at this point is the fact that through the collaboration that we have with Europe, particularly in the different programs that we have been able to participate in, it is key that as we sit here today, we need to reiterate the fact that in the age of data as a new capital, private sector partnerships, as I have highlighted even previously in some of the initiatives that we are part of, are key to creating sustainable joint Africa initiatives. And I think I have to reiterate the fact that Professor Abiodun, Adigun, yes, insisted that, of course, private sector institutions will need to be really motivated and nurtured in a way. And so at the heart of all these discussions, what we bring forward to the table is the fact that we're really pushing for a strong collaborative initiatives and private sector partnerships, as well as, the government to business-led sort of partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Viviane. So we've seen what a private company in Europe, that's Planet, is doing and is offering. We've heard from Viviane, a private company in Africa, what they've been doing. Now let's see an organization, a regional organization in Africa, and I invite Dr. Nkurunziza to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Etim, for the opportunity to participate in this forum. It's a pleasure to engage. Already I've learned a lot from the previous presentation. To start with, let me just make a small correction on my introduction. I've been Director General for the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development now for 4 years, since 2017. Before that, I worked for the government of Rwanda, heading the Natural Resources Authority that oversaw mining, forestry, water resources, and land, as well as being Chief Registrar of Land Titles, and had been in academia as a research fellow in the University of Birmingham and Cardiff University previous to that. So having said that, I think it's very interesting today, the mix we have on our panel. I mean, the diversity is excellent and brings to the fore all the key elements that are going to make this collaboration very, very useful. So the regional center, I'll speak briefly on where we sit in all this space as the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, or RCMRD. As introduced, it is an intergovernmental organization headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, and it brings together 20 member states, all the way from the Sudan to the Republic of South Africa. And its formation goes way back 46 years ago in 1975. And it was an idea by the Organization of African Unity at the time, together with the ECA, where they saw the importance of natural resources and being able to understand them, map them, and monitor them for the development of the member states. So this center was set up then. It has remained here serving member states, and in simple, its mission is to really help countries within our region and the continent generally harness the power and potential of Earth observation and geospatial technology to create improvements and effective use of these natural resource-based economies. So over the 40 years, of course, lots has changed in terms of approach, but the mission has remained the same. At the beginning, the focus was really more on technology, teaching people how to undertake surveying activities and prepare basic national maps that the countries needed. But over time, with advancement in satellite technology, remote sensing techniques, the focus has now gone more on application, we are trying to see how all these available data can now be used in different sectors rather than teaching people how to handle a theodolite or a total station or be able to do some cartography. So as I said, from the founding members, five founding members, we are now 20 member states. ECA remains a critical participant in the management of the center as being part of the governing council, but these countries own and manage the center. So the 20 countries all the way from Sudan to South Africa are the owners, but our mission does not actually restrict us to operation within this region. We have activities across the continent. For example, at the moment, we are supporting the government of Ghana, the government of Burkina Faso, their ministries of agriculture, building capacity in the utilization of GIS in monitoring agriculture value chains. But we are also privileged at the moment to be the secretariat of the AfriGeo. This is a subgrouping under the Global Geo that brings together all actors within the geo field across the continent, be they government, private, or civil society. So RCMRD is privileged to be the secretariat, and that gives us leeway, not just promote the use of Earth observation in East and Southern Africa, but across the continent. In terms of what we've done over the years, we have a number of collaborations that stem from the AU, and that is really the way we've been able to discharge our responsibilities, because there are principally 4 ways in which we support our member states. One is through project implementation, where countries identify areas where they need support. The second one that is very critical is capacity building and training. We provide short-term training to member states and beyond. Actually, today, this morning, we received 15 staff from the Liberia Land Authority that are going to be with us for the next 2 weeks, being trained in different fields of geospatial technologies. So capacity building is very critical. So we provide training to people who are already on the job, but we also have a training institute that is offering diplomas and certificates at different levels to whoever joins from across the continent. The third one is advisory. Member states come for advice, whether it's in space, on space issues, whether it's on Earth observation. We are trusted to provide advisory to member states on whatever they're undertaking, equipment purchase, methodologies, etc. Then research. Sometimes they come to us with a number of issues. For instance, they were asking us, how can we harness drone technology? Can you find for us how best to use this in agriculture or in other areas? So those are the 4 critical areas. And of course, as a center, we are only able to do this through collaboration and partnerships across Europe, across the continent, and even the US. We have, for example, one long-running partnership with NASA in the US through our Seville program that has been running for 13 years now. With EU, increased partnership has come up over the past few years. They have mentioned GMES and Africa, where we are one of the implementing partners with AUC that is implementing a number of applications in the IGAD region. But beyond GMES and Africa, we have a project with International Union of Conservation of Nature, where we are setting up a regional resource hub for protected areas under the funding of EU. Actually, our main entry point and our main collaborating entity is the Joint Research Center of the EU, where we work on all these programs together. We also have a program to set up Forest Observatory with the Center for Forest Research, also funded by EU. And several other initiatives, they've talked about Horizon 2020, where we are working on the Soils for Africa project. So clearly there are a number of interventions that are coming from the EU that where partners of the EU directly see us as an important entry point in executing these programs. So we look forward to greater cooperation, mainly in adding value to the products. I forgot to mention really the products from EU. Sentinel data has been very critical to our member states. And we are now adding value and training member states on how best to harness this important resource. I thank you, team. I think that gives you brief remarks from the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Nkurunziza, especially for highlighting other projects that are ongoing in the continent, apart from the GMES and the Africa projects. That's what I mean in terms of Earth observation. Talking about the partnership, it cannot exist. And generally, when we talk about space, it cannot exist in vacuum. It has to exist. I mean, it operates within an international legal framework or international governance system. And there's no other person to speak to that very well than Professor Kai Uwe Shrogu, the president of the International Institute for Space Law. You have the floor, please.
Etim, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and congratulations for putting this panel together. It's really fantastic. I learn a lot, and I'm very grateful that you are also recording that, because providing the recording of this panel will be a resource of great assessment and information to many people. So thank you very much for inviting the International Institute of Space Law to this experience. And maybe one word on the institute. It's a global institute. It's an institute which brings together the space lawyers, which are academics as well as practitioners from all world regions. So our institute is encompassing currently members from 50 countries. And what is very nice, the beauty of our institute, is that we are all talking on eye level, and that we learn from each other, that we work together, and that we do not want to present ideas, but we discuss ideas. And we also want, and this is very much encouraged, we also want new ideas, fresh ideas, and ideas from all perspectives. Now, I will be talking about space law for economic development and security, and about the expectations we have on Africa. So what can Africa contribute? Not what we would like Africa to do, to be put into a context of existing space law, but to see how Africa provides new concepts, fresh ideas, and also its interests in the context of a newly developing international and national space legislation. Next chart, please. So the heritage of international space law is briefly put in 4 points. For more than 50 years, we have been rather successful in space law making. Look at the Outer Space Treaty, which celebrated its 50th anniversary a few years ago. It's still a fantastic framework agreement, so to speak, an agreement of principles, which is still guiding international space activities. Therefore, it has, let's say, provided a stable order for the exploration and the peaceful uses of outer space. And what we have to see and to announce also with some possibly surprise, but I think we can be extremely glad about that, that the principles of international space law have been respected by the actors throughout these decades. And we have UN Corpus as a global forum which has been performing very successfully its role as a key enabler for the development of space law. Next chart, please. What we now, however, see is rather opposed trends. I would call them mega trends, which are relevant for space law development. The first one is that we could ask ourselves when we look around and we all see the space forces and the space commands and armies in outer space, that we could ask ourselves, are we approaching an anarchy in outer space? Outer space is congested and it becomes more and more contested also. There are growing risks and threats. We see militarization, and we might fear that the rule-based order we have seen for the past decades might disappear. So this is a trend. We are not yet completely in it, but we have to see the alarm signals. Secondly, at the same time, and this is the opposed trend, we see a rapidly expanding global space economy of today between 350 and 400 billion per year, which might reach by 2040 1 trillion. So the 1 trillion space economy per year. And you see that on the next slide. I will not go into that and explain that. It's just that you get a feeling about first the volume of this global space economy. Then you ask yourself, how much is Africa participating in that? And then the consequential question has to be, what shall be done in order to find the right place? But returning to my initial question, yes, we have two opposing trends. A global space economy, which is building up, needs a secure environment. But on the other hand, we have this kind of dangerous situation and slippery slope into a more anarchic system. Next chart. So what can we do to counter, first of all, the anarchy? We have to regulate the behavior in outer space. So transparency and confidence building measures. We have to carefully examine the reports by expert groups established by the UN Secretary General. We see a number of UN General Assembly resolutions. We have new concepts like space traffic management, and we have, of course, to maintain cyber security and establish cyber resilience in space. And what is very important, we have to refrain from jamming, spoofing, blinding, or hacking. And this is unfortunately already day-to-day business. And it is something where everybody is suffering from. And it is something where I would say all world regions, all single states have to limit and restrict themselves not to enter into such behavior. Next chart, please. We also have to see that we have to maintain peaceful exploration of moon and other celestial bodies, in particular when it comes to space resources. And here we, of course, have an issue of first comers and latecomers. And we should, and this is a kind of phrase I use constantly, and this also is important for everybody to reflect. It is security without securitization, which means applying concepts of military logic to space activities. And what is very important, we should not, we often hear that the Outer Space Treaty is old, we have to have something new. No, we should maintain the principles of Outer Space Treaty and just add further norms and rules for behavior. Now, and this is put in red, we need contributions for that. We do not have many contributions from Africa so far on these concepts, but I'm sure they are there, they are discussed in Africa. On the diplomatic level, Africa can provide more input, and I'm sure this input is very much welcome. It can also be new, it can be fresh, and I'm pretty sure it will certainly be helpful in the international debate. Next chart, please. We also have to look at the expanding space economy. How will it look like? What rules do we need and have to be established? And there I turn to the introduction. EU presidencies often have their kind of initiative. The German EU Council presidency had the initiative establishing key principles for the global space economy. And that means global space economy for all. So what we want to talk about and to establish is a level playing field, fair competition for everybody, no trade barriers, also very important, respect of intellectual property rights, equal opportunities for financing, a big issue also for Africa, and avoid flags of convenience through harmonized national authorization laws and regulations. Next chart, please. For that purpose, we have in the IASL also set out a position paper on authorization and continuous supervision of commercial space activities. And here I turn to the question in the forum. There was the question about the mega constellations. Now, mega constellations can be extremely helpful and useful for closing the digital divide and the digital gap, but on the same time, the mega constellations are blocking whole shells of orbits and might increase the debris population and make space unsafe for all users. So this is something we also need ideas and have to establish the right rules. Next chart, please. And there we are with other organizations. It's not only space as such, but it's also organizations like the ITU, where we have to look into. And what we should have in mind and keep up very high. And it's not simply a word, and Adi can certainly agree on that. It is that we have to maintain the character of space as a global common, global heritage of humankind, province of all mankind, which also encompasses that we do not have appropriation of space, that we do not have the first come, first serve everywhere, and we have to avoid that billionaires are setting the rules. So again, contributions from Africa are needed and are very much welcome in this context. Next chart, please. Last one, it is about the future of international space law, and there I summarize, we have to provide transparency and confidence building to make space safe for everybody, and not only our generation. We have to regulate the behavior in outer space, long-term sustainability and space traffic management, and we have to provide a fair and reasonable regulatory framework for the global space economy. Next chart. And this is where I end. Contributions from Africa are needed, and they are welcome. And I want to show you this photo because it shows one thing, and Val mentioned it at his outset. It's education and it's talent. And my experience in IISL with African colleagues is that Africa has wonderful talent. This shows the world finals of the IISL Manfred Lux Space Law Moot Court. 100 universities participate all over the globe, and they are then out-selected until the world final, and this is done under the judging of 3 judges of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. You see them sitting in the front row. And 2 years ago, when we had the last one in presence, the team from Pretoria was the winner of the world final out of 100 teams. So they can be, and they were extremely proud, and this shows Africa has talent. Africa has also political and diplomatic leverage. Use it, either in UN corpus or in ITU or other organizations. There are also the terms which will change since Africa will become an economic superpower in the next decades. And Africa, and this is also a theme I heard throughout the presentations, and this is where I listened very carefully and learned a lot. Africa can inject also new models for governance and cooperation to the global space economy, to the global community as a whole. And this is something where I personally, I'm trying to let that emerge also through IISL, but it should also be presented on the global diplomatic level. Last chart. This is what we stand for, maintaining the rule of law in outer space. And I know all our African colleagues, be they academic, be they practitioners, join in this theme. And for this, I'm extremely grateful. Thank you very much, Etim.
Thank you, Kairuwe, for highlighting the international governance framework in which the EU, AU, or Europe-Africa Partnership works, and also for responding to the question in the chat. Actually, I'd actually planned that once you finish, I was going to ask you to address that question, but luckily you've already taken it up. You talked about recording. Yes, this event is being recorded, and it will be shared. We plan to upload it on YouTube and make it publicly available. The links, the information will be sent out to participants. We have just very few minutes left, and I'll just mention that the questions that we cannot take now, we'll respond to them later and share with participants. I just want us to quickly address, maybe Dr. Abiodun want to address the question from Umar Kabanda. Is asking about the African cooperation with Japan, China, and Russia, and how that affects or complements the EU-AU relations. Is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? Just a quick response.
I think it's both. And it depends on the African countries themselves. How are you going into this partnership? Are you going blindfolded, or are you going informed? And what do you intend to gain from such a relationship? My belief is that if the African countries by themselves will use their own homegrown talents and more or less do a good homework in order to make an informed decision, the ability to negotiate whatever they are negotiating, either with China or Japan or other countries, will go well. But it depends on what is your goal. And when you are doing this, are you doing it for personal reasons or for national reasons? And if it's for national reasons, what interests of the country are you taking along when you are negotiating? And with that, whatever you come back home with, is that going to be on a long-term basis in the interest of your country? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abiodun. Agnieszka, if I can quickly come to you, talking about the different levels of partnership that we could explore. What are your suggestions for stimulating industry-to-industry partnership, particularly within the space domain, I mean, between EU and Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several ways to partner. Like, for instance, at Planet, we have partnerships with lots of different companies, especially downstream companies all over the world. So one way to partner is for a company to actually, that is an analytical company that actually take, like I said earlier, take our data and turn it into applications, information, products, etc. So then they sell that final product themselves. Another way is to be a reseller of Planet data, so they can also act as a reseller in their region, and that and then they get obviously a commission of what they sell. But we can also join into projects together, you know, into consortia and bid together on larger projects. It's always, especially if you work locally, it's extremely beneficial to have a local partner and to work with somebody who with the local knowledge and local expertise. So we're not going to do big business in Africa without African companies working with us. So it's a mutual interest, really.
Thank you, Vivian. If I may just go in that same line. How will you describe the readiness of African companies within this domain like Agnieszka pointed out, space is high tech. So the private companies in Africa, how ready are they to take up the challenge of partnering with companies in Europe? Sorry, you're muted.
So in terms of the readiness levels for African private sector, particularly the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, I think there lies a very good opportunity in terms of us, boasting of the fact that we are ready, in the sense that can be seen through the various partnerships that we've already been having, say with Europe, but also particularly because of the younger workforce that we have, the capacity and the technical skills that we do possess really do place us in a position where we're ready to partner with all like-minded institutions from Europe, but also not just in the development of the tools, but also in the execution, or ensuring that some of these services are implemented or uptaken in the larger communities that or regions that we do work in.
Dr. Nkurunziza, you may also wanted to respond in terms of the readiness of African institutions. You may want to focus more on the research institutions, but not only with respect to Earth observation. I mean, you can also respond to the challenge by Professor Shrogo with respect to space law, space governance, and how Africa can actually contribute to what's happening in the global community.
Thank you, Tim. I think, as Vivian has just mentioned, the continent is more or less ready. Dr. Tidiane said earlier that space is not very new to Africa, even though there's not a critical mass of people who have worked in this area. But there's a good level of expertise across the continent. And I think with the advancement of technology, the people and the local people are catching up with what is happening across the globe. So I want to believe that there are many people like Vivian and others who would be ready to interface with companies from Europe or the US and do great things. In terms of research, I think really one area, much as I have said, is that capability. We still have a role to build a critical mass. And I think that's where an organization like ours and partnership with Europe can also play an important role, not just on the hard technology, but also on the awareness and bring the policymakers on board. As an organization, we normally bring together ministers and PSCs to meet every year. But sometimes you talk about these things and they're a little bit distant, and yet the people are supposed to make decisions on in these areas. So working together, I think through benchmarking, through awareness, there is a lot that can be done to really transform the mindset that is required to support these SMEs and support the young people who have the expertise today.
Thank you. I'm aware that we are slightly running over time, but just very quickly, Professor Shogu, having highlighted the international framework, and we are talking about EU-Africa partnership. Now, how can these two regions work together towards strengthening the international governance framework? You mentioned the threats to outer space, and we see trends like countries trying to bring up initiatives, national initiatives or personal initiatives, like the Artemis Accords and things like that. Whereas the initiative that EU introduced then, the international, the framework for space security did not really go very far as at that time. So how can EU and AU work together towards strengthening the global governance system in space?
Well, there are a number of fields, and indeed, what you have pointed out, Etim, is certainly a very good starting point. we all are concerned about a situation in outer space which is not providing anymore a secure and safe operations framework. And there, I think Africa and Europe should develop joint positions on that, because we share the same objectives. And such a dialogue will certainly also bring new and fresh ideas to European positions, which we have already started to prepare. Because what I have seen in discussions, bilateral discussions with African representatives in, for example, UN COPUOS, but also in other organizations, is that you have also governance ideas and ideas for peaceful conflict resolution, for example, which are extremely interesting for the whole community and should be jointly developed and jointly then also presented. So I think the dialogue between the two unions should be further to what we have been discussing now in the specific and substantive fields of space activities, should be complemented with joint diplomatic initiatives, because I see a very strong overlap of our objectives in these fields.
Thank you, Kaihuwe. I'm sorry, we may not be able to go take any more questions for now, but we're going to collate all the questions and then share them with the panelists or discussants, get their responses, and then make it available to all the participants. I want to thank everybody for participating in this panel. And but before we go, I'll welcome Dr. Muhammad Dragu, who is the director in charge of space in the African Union Commission, to give his to make some closing remarks. Dr. Muhammad, please.
Thank you, Etim. I'm sure it was a very long day. A lot of useful information, and I want to really thank you for really this opportunity to close this important meeting, which has the participation of important space scholar and professionals from Africa and Europe. It's really very, very informative. A lot of useful discussion that came out of it. I'm sure that the outcome will be very, very instrumental in moving forward the AU-EU space cooperation. You know, in short, I mean, from the discussion, looking really at historical perspective, we can say that over the last decade, the African side has really moved from different projects on space to really having an African space program almost complete, and of course with the coming up of the African Space Agency, etc., a lot of good things are coming. The benefit of space to socio-economic for African socio-economic development, and also of course the EU side, have been clearly outlined. You know, whether it is in agriculture, precision, or whether we take it along some of the different pillars of our own African space policy and strategy. There were also clear indications from the intervention from Dr. Ouattara, Professor Munsami. He doesn't want me to call him prof, but he's a well knowledgeable professor anyway. Clearly, it has come up that although we have in the African side some Pan-African Space Institute, we need to really have a space policy institute in Africa, and this is well noted, and I think this is something that at the level of the African side we should really continue to work on. The issue of space law has been brought there, the issue of private sector and the need of ensuring that space is costly and we need to invest in it, have clearly came out of this meeting. And I think that that means that we need also from the African side to ensure that we also invest in space so that the partnership will be a fully fledged partnership, like what was coming from the floor. It has to be a win-win situation where both sides are really investing to make things work. Some of the critical programs, GMES and Africa, Digital Earth, Egnos, have already underlined the strong relation, the historical relation and bond that exists between the two sides. And we appreciate that all that will come out strongly in the outcome of the meeting. And finally, I want to press on the fact that in terms of governance, there are challenges, and the African side can, of course, learn from the European side in terms of governance of some of these institutions that cut across borders. That's why we are talking about transnational governance. We need to learn from each other, but the African side can learn more because of the fact that it's really behind and it can really take note of what is happening in the European side and really contextualize it in Africa, so that we can really get these institutions, these type of governance that will really build a strong African space program and institution. I want to also outline the role of the university, which has been clearly underlined. They play a very important role and they should not be forgotten in the process. So again, thank you to all the panelists for really the wealth of knowledge that they have brought into the session. And for me, again, it is an opportunity to really express gratitude to Etim Offiong for all the good things he has done when he was here at the commission and really moving it forward. We really thank you for what you have done for the session. And I thank everybody, and that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahama. And maybe some major takeaways before, just as we leave, that apart from the current levels of engagement between the EU and the AU, there are other levels of engagement we can explore and we should explore. For example, the African Space Agency at the agency level to the European Space Agency or other similar institutions. And then there's the mention of the African Space Policy Institute, that there's a need for that, and which can also interact with other similar institutes in Europe. And possibly having this kind of engagement where the space community that is operating within the AU-EU framework can also be engaging in this kind of roundtable discussion from time to time. And then finally, I'll just remind us that the recording will be made available. So just watch out. Once it's available, it will make participants aware, and then you can listen and, of course, still get back to us to know areas you want us to tackle or to work on. Once again, I thank everybody. Thank you for staying this long, and I look forward to more engagements, either virtually like this or physically in future. Thanks to all the panelists. Thank you for making out time to participate in this panel. Thank you, and bye for now. Yeah, bye. Yeah.